From educators to authors, join us now on our new journey as podcasters. In our podcast, Author Talk with L&B, we will talk about our author journey and share our stories in order to help you share yours. You will get an in-depth look of the how-tos we were looking for when we got started. Stay tuned for topics ranging from how to get published to how to stay inspired.
Hello, and welcome again to Author Talk with L&B, where we get you to where you need to be. We're so excited today to have Embassie Susberry, who is my cousin, who is on with us today. So thank you so much, Embassie, for joining us. And she's going to just basically share her knowledge and her story and her process. And hopefully that can help many of you who are in the process, or maybe you're at the beginning stages of writing your books, but she has a wealth of knowledge, and we're so happy to have her today. So Embassie, we're just going to jump right into some questions for you. So the first question I want to ask you is, like, I kind of know this, but I want you to share this with the audience. How did you begin your journey? So first of all, just tell us how many books you've written and how you even began to start your journey of writing.
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me. I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was a teenager. And I have a type A personality. So I was like, what does it take to get published? Because, I grew up when Amazon was sort of just being invented. So self-publishing was a very hard journey if you didn't have Amazon. And it was kind of like, you knew when a book was self-published, right? You picked it up and you're like, this isn't right. So I was like, that's not what I want to do. So I decided to study creative writing in college. I made a point of kind of like reading about different authors' journeys to getting published. I went to writers' conferences and things like that. And obviously I wrote a book because, you can want to be a writer all day long, but until you write something, it means nothing.
Right.
So I think, I was trying to do everything right that you hear to do right when it comes to that journey. And one of the things that kind of took me off the path that I thought that I was creating was I went to this writers conference. So I write historical fiction from a Black American point of view. I've always loved history. I read Anne Rinaldi, Dear America, anything that you can think of. And it was like, if there was a Black person, they were like the slave in the background. And I was like, everybody has a story to tell. Why is ours always like in the kitchen? And so I wanted to write about that person in the kitchen. What was her story? What was her romance and her children? And so I went to this conference and I shopped the book that I wrote. And the lady was like, nobody wants to read about social justice issues. But if you write something modern, you're a good writer, will publish it. Modern books, modern romances, that's not my thing, first of all. But secondly, I never looked at it as social justice issues. It was just like, she's falling in love and it's Jim Crow. That was just history, So it was kind of like that clarifying moment that told me this was not going to be an easy thing. It's going to be much harder than I wanted. And so I kept writing because I was under the belief that you're not really a writer unless you can write more than one book. So I was like, fine, I'll just keep writing. And I just kept writing and I kept writing. I entered that first book into a contest. It got second place. So for me, that was like validation that the book itself was good. But it wasn't, it was years later. Because the first book I started in like 2005. And it was 2014 when somebody sat me down and was like, it's time, just self-publish it. And, I did it. I did it reluctantly. I was super embarrassed about it at the time. And if you had asked me if I was a writer, I wouldn't have said yes. So it was a journey, but it wasn't until I probably wrote my 14th book that I could sit down and tell somebody, yeah, I'm a writer. That was before I became traditionally published, but it's been a journey, and anybody who gets on it has to be prepared for the long haul.
First of all, congratulations. That is quite a journey. And you shared so much in that response. That what's inspired your writing, the fact that it is such a process, what internal feelings that you have. Like, now that you reflect back, would you tell listeners to go through that self-publishing route or traditional publishing, or how do you guide them to find their way of saying, I am a writer? I did this too.
So I think, it kind of comes down to what's important to you. I wanted to be traditionally published. I had to try it. I had to try to get there. And the way that I end up being traditionally published is just so random and bizarre. But, if you want to be an author, you kind of have to figure out why. It's something that I ask myself all the time, because a real author puts in lots and lots of time crafting a book. And you may walk away at the end of the day with just enough money to put gas in your car if you're lucky. And so, you kind of have to decide, why am I doing this in the first place? And it's that why that'll keep you going. If you're set on being traditionally published, and you can, I'm sure if I waited long enough, I could have been traditionally published. Or if you go self-publishing route, because both routes will break your heart at some point. So you kind of have to figure out, why am I doing this in the first place? And then it doesn't matter how it turns out in the end.
Yeah, that's good. And I like what you said, because Laura and I always talk about the process and really understanding your why, because that's what helps you to keep going. If you're in it for any other reason, then you might as well get out, right? Because there's always got to be that thing that drives you. You have a different perspective because you've seen both sides of it. And so what are the pros and cons of each? Because there are people that are waiting. I have talked to authors, they're just like, you know what? I want to be traditionally published. I'm just going to wait. Whereas others, we encourage to just step out there and get your work out there. And then also the way that self-publishing is changing and evolving is so different than it was 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. It's more popular now. So what would you say the pros and the cons are of self-publishing versus traditional publishing?
So I would say, with traditional publishing, and let me just give a caveat. I'm something of a write for hire author. So I think most people assume that they're going to be traditionally published. They write their book, they pitch it to an agent or to an editor, and the hope is that the publishing company will fall in love with that book. So what happens is, the editor comes to me and says, can you write a book about X? And so I put that in there to say that with self-publishing, I write what I want to write, when I want to write it, how I want to write it. With traditionally published books, at least mine, it's very much them kind of telling me how they want the person to be. They'll give me an outline. I've got to hit certain points, get from A to B to C. Based off of how you are, that's either a pro or a con. I'll say that I personally prefer to have more control over the narrative. It's been a learning experience working with a publisher. I value everything that they've said. Everything that I've learned from them, I put into my own books. So it's very valuable. There's a team already established with a publishing company. They're all ready to sign your cover, to pick the title, to edit, to all of that. When you're self-publishing, you have to create your own team. You have to figure out who you want to do your cover, who's your beta readers, who's going to help you edit the book, things like that. With traditionally published books, you get paid up front. Self-published, you get paid as the book sells. It's, pros and cons for both.
Thank you for your honesty in all of that. I think that is very helpful to know. What is the process of getting the word out about your book? Having both self-published and then traditionally published, how do you promote your book? How involved when you are self-published versus traditionally published? How do they look different?
So I'm terrible at advertising. A, it's not my personality. And B, when I started writing, I was also practicing law. So it was like, I can only do so much. And if something's going to fall through the cracks, it's going to be advertising. So my logic was publish as many books as I can and let my books sort of sell themselves, which actually turned out to work. And I would say it was probably the 5th or 6th book that I sold before it caught on. And I say that with self-publishing and like Amazon, some kind of funky algorithm. But, if you write so many books in a genre, they start to come up for people who are looking for that genre. And so my thing was just like, have as many books in that genre that people want to read. So that was my advertising. Now, I do have a website but I probably only post on there like when I have a book coming out. Otherwise, I'm not on there. Now, I did publish with HarperCollins. When they tweet out something or use X, their audience is just massive. So they've helped in that way. Now, I work with HarperCollins UK. So it's a little bit different. A lot of their advertising is geared towards British. So like my book, Codename Butterfly, was picked as like the book of the month for Tesco, which I think is like Walmart here. So they had a lot of different ways to advertise it in the UK. So you know, it's been different all the way around. But me personally, I'm you know, word of mouth is kind of how I've been doing it.
That's awesome. And as you're talking, I'm like writing things down, Laura. I'm like, we got to talk about this afterwards. But like, it's so helpful. But so like, basically, one of the things that you said that just really resonated with me is that you were consistent. Like with you stayed and you focused on that, and that's how it caught. Because a lot of authors are like, well, how am I supposed to do this? And how am I? But I think if you just like stick with that in that genre and begin to continue to write in that genre, it will eventually over time, you know, catch up and things like that. So I love that. So I guess my question is, so what is the future looking like for you? What is your goal in all of this? So you've gone from self-publishing, now you're getting these projects, to traditionally published. Where do you see yourself in the future?
So writing is not full-time. I do have a day job, but you know, I see myself always self-publishing. And I took that from all the way back to that first writers conference where they were like, we don't want to read social justice issues. You know, everybody's not going to be happy with the topics that I write about, but I have long since made peace that if I'm happy, then I'm okay. You know, the reason why I write, a little girl who wanted to read about Black history and couldn't find any of those books. So if I'm not writing that, then I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Right now, I'm not under contract for another traditionally published book. And I'll be honest, if they came and asked me to do another one, I would definitely consider it. But I've reached the point in my life where it's not the goal that I have. You know, telling the story is the goal that I have.
Would you say you enjoy the self-publishing route more than the traditionally published route? Like, is that the place where you thrive the most, would you say? Or
yeah, I think so. I mean, books that I self-publish, I wake up with them on my mind. You know, I go to work, I'm driving to work, I'm thinking about the next chapter. I'm very excited about it. Not to say that I don't get excited about the traditionally published ones. Codename Butterfly was my first one, and that was, for me, it was an incredible ride. And I'm so glad that I did it.
You know, Laura invited me to a bookstore, and I told you this, but I have to say it on the podcast. It was so amazing. I was like, I'm related to somebody famous. That's what I felt like when I went to the bookstore and they were doing a book club on your book. And it was just so like, wow, it's amazing to me to see your process.
It's also very impressive, like how many books you have read. That's firing, like just hearing your journey and hearing that, like what propels your writing. And I think that's something that is a real nugget for anybody listening, is like doing and following your gut. You're a storyteller. You want to tell stories for like voices that need to be heard, especially your own voice. So I'm just wondering, as you're thinking about your career, if you were to do anything differently, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I think that mostly I would have done administrative things differently.
Okay.
When I published my first book, I was like, I was really reluctant. And I was like, nobody's going to read this. So I made no effort to get it in paperback. It's still not in paperback to this day. But like, I was just like, whatever. You know, there's a lot of things that I kind of wish I would have just taken the steps to do. I just in the past year got most of them put in paperback, and that was hard. Like to wait until I have 10 to 15 books to put into paperback, that like I wish I would have just done it. I had a lot more time just to sort of believe in it a little bit more than earlier. So yeah. So take the time. That's what I say. Yeah. Especially even if nobody's reading it now,
So, as Laura and I have talked to authors, many of them say the same thing you're saying, Embassy, just like the fear of putting themselves out there for people to judge. That's very hard for me. Laura,
Me too.
we've
Me
talked
too.
about that. How do you handle that? Where was the point? Because it seems like you kind of gotten over the hump, or you're even getting over that hump where you're just like, okay, now I'm at the point where I'm ready to put it out there. And I wish I hadn't waited this long. But what got you to that place? Because I think that's very important for our listeners to hear. Because fear is like one of the biggest things that come up. What happened in your mind where you're just like, you know what? I'm going to put it out there.
Well, okay, with that first one, it was easy because I was like, nobody knows who I am anyway. So it was like, what does it matter? It was when Codename Butterfly came out. I was like, I should use a pseudonym. But it all kind of goes back to believing in what you write. So I have beta readers, and there's one, my sister, who is like, she reads nonfiction. I hand her my book. She's never like moved by the romance or any, like none of that is really exciting to her. And so she'll be the first one to be like, well, that was boring or that was stupid. And because she's my sister, she's very straightforward. But when she gives me her criticism, if I can take it, then I'm like, and I can be like, I don't care. I love it just the way it is. Then I can stand behind it. She has criticized a book before that almost put me in tears. And it was because I didn't quite believe the story that I was selling. So I had to kind of go back to the drawing board with that one. It's like she's able to pinpoint parts of myself that would be either self-conscious or something where I'm like, no. I like it just the way it is. And so if I can stand behind it, then, I don't care, even when people criticize my book, whatever. If I loved it, you were not the first audience anyway. I was the first audience. Yeah. And I thought it was great.
I love that.
Well, I was thinking about like when you were talking about like even people like or you're really close with giving feedback. How do you help yourself like from not being discouraged? Like we said, like if I'm able to receive feedback, it's hard for me unless it's complete compliments all the time to receive like what people are saying. How do you respond to that?
It's hard.
I mean, at the end of the day, I want to write a book that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's one thing if somebody says, well, I didn't like it. Like, that's not helpful to me. That's not helpful. But if you can articulate, like, it just didn't make sense when your character did this, then I can say that, okay, yes, that hurt my feelings, but maybe there really is a plot hole there, right? There's something that I'm not connecting. Okay. And I'm related to all of my beta readers.
Yeah.
So it's a little easier to take it.
Like we are obviously amazed by all the work that you've done. It's important as a writer to be proud of yourself for doing that work. One thing we are curious about is like, what is your proudest moment? And what is a challenging moment that you had in your career?
I'll start with my proudest moment. And I had written this World War II series because I really wanted to highlight the roles that Black Americans played in World War II. I grew up in a historical family. My parents are vets. We watch war movies all the time. You never see Black people in World War II. You just don't see them. And my grandfather was in World War II. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So I wrote a whole series highlighting different aspects of the military in World War II. But it was also kind of like, I Know What You Did Last Summer, because the main characters had been caught up in this like dead body situation and they had split, but now they're being blackmailed. Anyway, they're very thick books. Like we're talking over 120,000 words each. When I first started it, I was like, I don't know if I can finish it. And when I finished that last one, it's like sticking the landing, in those gymnasts when they're flipping in the Olympics and they stick the landing. And it was just like, yes. And that was kind of like the first time that I was like, I don't care what anybody says. I'm a writer. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I wrote these things. I'm a writer. And it was actually when I finished that last one, I got a message from HarperCollins asking me to write Codename Butterfly. So, I know that series indirectly influenced that one. So that was kind of like my proudest moments, my most challenging moments. I mean, sometimes I write books that, I'm just not sure if anybody else will like. One of them, I wrote a series about former slaves. And I remember I wrote it and I read it and I read it again. I read it again. And finally was like, whatever, I'll just, post it to Amazon. And I was feeling a little bit discouraged about it. But it is my top selling series, even more so than that World War II one. It all kind of comes back to believing in what you're doing, because with self-publishing, it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes you're getting the love and sometimes you are forgotten. So you just kind of have to know what motivates you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good, Embassie. And sometimes the work that you wrestle with the most, like you said, like you were kind of like, is anybody going to read this? Is anybody going to like it? And that was one of your sellers. Like the people really liked it and read it. And I guess that's just like wisdom to us and to those that are listening, that sometimes you just have to follow what's in here, like, and trust, like, you know what? I'm going to just put it out there. I believe in this. This is what I've been called to do. I'm going to put this out there. It's amazing what could happen just taking that leap of faith. And so I love that. I want to go back before we close. I want to just go back because you said something that I really want to know more about, and that's writers' conferences. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What conferences you've gone to? Maybe what conferences would be helpful for self-published authors and traditionally published authors?
I haven't been to a conference in a while, but I highly recommend them, if only for their writing classes. There's no way that you have arrived. I do not consider myself to ever have arrived. The Game Changer, which was my second traditionally published book, I had to go and get Save the Cat, I think is what it's called. It's a writing book. I'll have to look it up. But
right, I'm writing that down. Sorry.
And it's like the author was like, really, and don't quote me, it's like 6 to 10. She was like, really, there's only 6 or 7 plots in this world. Your book is going to follow one of them. And so, I believe in writers' conferences because you get to hear from, these speakers. They're always imparting advice that, you might not have done in your first books, but you'll take and run with the other ones. Strong writers constantly trying to learn. Even if it comes down to reading what other people are writing in your genre, right? Not invented anything. My stories are not new. Other people have written them. So just reading what other people have written, figuring out what it is that you liked about those things that they wrote, and how do you identify those things in your own writing. So yeah, I haven't been to that many conferences lately, but I do read books and things about writing and just how I can be a better writer.
So would you say you read a lot, which helped you to understand what was sellable or readable?
So I grew up reading a lot, right? In high school, I read a book a day. I spent so many years just consuming literature. Yeah. And then after a while, when you begin to write, you begin to realize what it is that you do successfully or what you don't do successfully, or what you like in a book and what you don't like in a book. I actually don't read as much anymore, not because I don't like reading, but my tolerance is just like,
okay,
it's like this when it comes to fiction. If you don't have me in that first chapter, I don't want to read anymore. And then, I'll stop and I'll pause and I'll be like, well, what is it about it that makes me not want to read anymore? And have I done that in my own writing? And so I just go at it harsher. But yeah, I'm sorry. Did I answer the question?
No, you 100% answered the question. And Laura, this is all true. A book a day is what she did. Like she's avid reader, just reader. I just remember those days. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I was so impressed by that because I have a book club and I really love reading. That is amazing. Good job. Like we are so impressed.
Yeah.
We really do thank you a lot for being here, for all this help. Like, this is super helpful, I know, to us, and I'm sure to everyone listening here too. I know you've given a lot of advice, like that this takes a lot of work internally, externally, doing the work and believing in yourself. But if you were to like consolidate everything that you've learned from your personal experience, from these conferences that you just talked about, like the amalgamation of all of these things, if you could synthesize it for us, what would be the biggest advice that you would give to an aspiring writer or even a current writer like us just trying to get out there?
I think it kind of goes back to the why. And so whenever I finish a book, I always thank my readers for reading it, and I hope that they're both blessed and entertained. I'm kind of leaving my mark and my legacy behind here. Been so much time immersed in history. Sometimes I wonder, like, would my great grandparents have been proud of me? That's kind of the things that motivate me. So I would just say, figure out what motivates you. Obviously, like I said, I have a day job because I've written 21 books and I still got to go to work every morning. So, I'm doing this because I love it and because, it's important to me. So, a lot of people just say, I can write a book. Don't just write a book. Go sit down somewhere.
I agree.
Come back when you have a story to tell.
Yeah. I think that, and the biggest takeaway I think for us is just the thing that I heard throughout what you said was just when you have that purpose, like when you want to get a message out to the people, like you have a goal. Like for me, it's like overcoming fear, like dealing with social emotional learning, and Laura too. And so when you have that goal, it drives you, like what you were meant to do, what you're here for. And it is evident in everything you do, Embassie. I've watched you over the years. I've gotten to watch you like be front row and just see you and how you dedicated your life to like being an avid reader, and then just you put in the work. You really did. And to see you here is just inspiring. It's very inspiring to me. I told Laura, I was like, I really do look up to you when it comes to that, because it's inspiring. It spurs me on, and I know it spurs Laura on as well.
Literally feel the love. I love that. One thing we forgot to ask you was like how was your typical day, especially given that like you go to work? Like what is your typical day?
I try to be in bed by 9 because I get up at 5 so that I can write before I go to work. I'm fortunate in the sense that I can work from home 2 days a week. So like on those days when I'm working from home, I'm able to kind of recoup that traveling time and put in more hours.
Your day is very structured like that. Like you get up at 5 every morning, you write, then you do it's like a routine every day that you do.
Oh, yeah. I'm very type A. I wake up in the morning and I create a list.
Yeah. I feel like those are the most productive people, like the ones that have that structured routine.
Well, you have to be because I'm self-publishing, I have to create my own deadlines and I have to meet them.
Well, we just want to thank you again so much for being here with us. Again, Author Talk with LMB, where we want to get you to where you want to be. This is all so helpful.
Thank you so much, Embassie, for joining, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Author Talk with LMB. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to guide you on your journey as an inspiring author. Remember, every great story starts with a single word. So keep writing, keep dreaming, and never stop believing in your voice. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow authors. Join us next time for more tips, interviews, and encouragement. Until then, keep turning your pages and crafting your narrative. Happy writing.